Thanks very much, Annie. Thanks to Pepe and to Gulai for inviting me here. I was waiting outside. There was a strange sonic disjunction. There was incredible amounts of cheering and whooping coming from what I thought was this hall. Very, very intimidating. I didn't realise the cricket was on. Just in case you were expecting, I kind of, minute by minute, punching the air moments. I'll give you a couple of at least more conceptually. I certainly didn't think I could match crack dealers and their mums, but I'd like to talk about perhaps aspects of where the crack dealers might live, which is place. Place is what underscores and kind of brackets pretty much everything I do. I work, as Annie said, as a writer, editor, curator, producer, and I think over the last 15 years or so I've realised that actually pretty much everything I do has something to do with place, and therefore by definition forms of belonging. We can all identify ourselves by different categories, by different groupings, ethnicity, sexuality, place of origin, etc. But of course what we all share, where we are right now in London, is a sense of place. We belong to the same city at this point in our lives, if not throughout our lives. And increasingly, obviously, in ecological terms, we're daily more aware of the importance of place, the erosions of place, the disappearances of place, and the changing weather systems that inhabit place. But socially and culturally, place is becoming ever more important and has moved really from the margins to the centre stage of many discourses and approaches to how we might live and belong to and with each other, both in cities and of course and outside the cities, across all forms of landscape. And the projects I've done, been involved with over the last 15 years or so, have taken many forms, but the most interesting, I think, from my perspective, but perhaps also from audience perspectives, have been those that have crossed borders between disciplines and art forms, and between practitioners. So not only within the arts realm, but bringing thinkers, writers, filmmakers, activists together. So in that way, there's a sense that this kind of space, of course, is also an example of that. It's a place of ideas, and that's the space that we start from in terms of thinking about how we might change and affect things in the wider world. So the forms of place that I've been dealing with, particularly in the last couple of years, have been around the UK and about the project that you can see behind me, which is called the Re-Enchantment. It was a 3-year project, and it was explicitly asking a number of artists and writers and filmmakers to investigate a particular place at depth, a place they felt committed to, they had a sense of belonging to, either culturally or actually in their lives, and then to create an original response, a commissioned response to it, around this idea of what re-enchantment might be for them. Now, of course, the idea of re-enchantment of place or of anything is a provocative and deliberately problematic term. The immediate question that follows is whose re-enchantment is it? Are we flying in to deliver a kind of re-enchantment to that place, to that population, to that landscape, and then flying out again without much response or responsibility to what happens after that? Or are we going to try and get behind the scenes a little bit more and try and pick up those threads and forms of belonging that we all share, but by a particular manifestation in relation to the place that they're expressed within? So the Re-Enchantment took 4 original commissions and it placed them across the country, across time, across the year in fact, in terms of the public expression of the project, and across media. And it tried to create a festival of place, while in many ways denying the actual basis of what a festival is, normally in one place, normally in one medium, in film festivals of course, and normally over a very short and concentrated period of time. As I said, we looked at a year's worth of work across the whole of the UK and across art forms. And we started, if we could perhaps go to the project page and click on England, no, just that's it, thank you, and click on England Revisited. Oh, the Re-Enchantment, and then click on England Revisited, you just scroll down, yeah, that's it, thank you. The first project was done in the summer of July and August 2010, and it was called England Revisited, and it was a remaking of a project by the artist Simon English. In 1971, he traced the word England on the map of England by going to the nodal points of each letter, from just south of Hadrian's Wall to the south coast of England. And that's Simon now. You might be able to go, this will apply to the other pages as well. If we go to, just scroll down with the phone, and you should be able to click on some images just to the right there. And we just do that at your own speed if you like to. England Revisited was a mapping of the word England onto England. Originally, Simon made this project in 1971, where he went, as I said, to the letter points of the word England and marked signage there, photographed, documented it, picked up the flora of the site, and recorded his thoughts on what he saw. In 2009, he went back and did that just under 40 years later, and made the same journey. But of course, where the first journey was about place primarily, he was mapping the place in each site. This time it was about time, or it was about the changing of place. And what he noted, which was perhaps surprising, was that while many things had changed, particularly the loss of railways since the early 70s and the second wave of British railway cuts, and therefore the subsequent crop changes to farms and to communities, what he also noticed was that a lot hadn't changed. But he realised very quickly that that was a conscious process. The actual natural process of things, of course, in lives and in landscapes is change. And where change had not appeared to happen in terms of the architectural or the landscape arrangements, it was a conscious process of stopping change. And so he realised very quickly that forms of belonging take two primary dynamics: resistance to or embodiment within change. And that was very important, I think, in setting up the project for us as a whole across the year. We then went to a book in the autumn called Towards Re-Enchantment, where many of the country's leading writers were asked to respond to a very specific location, sometimes a field. Obviously they chose the place, a field, a town, a village, a piece of coastline. And again, to imagine whatever form or register they wanted to, how they might reimagine or re-enchant this place for the wider readership. And then in January of last year, we premiered the feature documentary Patience After Sebald, which is currently on general release across the UK and opens in the US in May. This was a new film by the director Grant G, who previously was known for his music documentaries. You might have seen his films about Joy Division, Radiohead and Gorillaz. But what was behind all those films was a keen sense of the place that those bands inhabited, and in the most recent case, Joy Division's post-industrial Manchester, and how that formed their music and their sense of cultural identity. With Patience, he travelled the route of the book The Rings of Saturn by the late great German writer W.G. Sebald, who died just over 10 years ago. And in doing that walk across Suffolk, of course an impossible walk, because he is not Sebald, he did not do it when Sebald made the walk and made the book himself. And crucially, the book is a fiction on one level. It's a changing of the landscape to suit the narrative purposes of the book. But it is also, of course, a creative journey through a particular place, and in the case of Sebald's book, through the whole of 20th century history. Any of you who know Sebald's writing will know that he can move very quickly from a really bad breakfast in a B&B in Lowestoft to the Congo and to the outer reaches of the universe with the Voyager space probe, and then back to the breakfast, which is now that much colder, in the space of a couple of pages and probably even one sentence. He takes a journey through ideas and through place and history that is quite extraordinary. And we tried to find a way on film to capture that journey through the editing process, of course, and through commentators and archive footage, to give a much deeper sense, a really stratified sense of place through moving image. And then in May of last year, we went to the Yorkshire Dales, and we produced a project called Fisher. And Fisher was a 3-day continuous walk around the landscape, the exterior landscape of the Yorkshire Dales, following a route above and below ground and finally up to the peak of the mountain Ingleborough in the Dales. And that route followed the neurological route of the brain of the theatre maker's sister, Louise Ann Wilson's sister, who died from a brain tumour about 10 years earlier. And we discovered that neurological mapping is very similar to geological mapping. They share the same landscapes and the same terminologies. And Brodmann's map, still the key map of the brain, which was created over 100 years ago, explicitly uses geological and geographic terms. And so we followed the route of her sister's disease operation onto the landscape in a form of redemptive walking out, if you like, of the trauma of the process. This was a group of about 70 people, continuously over 3 days. And it became a process of literally mapping someone's life, and in this case, tragic early death, onto the landscape they grew up in and inhabited. So we found, in a way, the most keen form of belonging, and of course then our disappearance from that landscape in that project. But I've also been working much more recently with a project much closer to home in London. And if we can go to the second website now, thank you. Some of you who live or might know Hackney and the Regent's Canal there, near Broadway Market, London Fields, might have seen this building at various points. It's the Haggison Estate, and this is the last building on the estate still standing. It's coming down in this coming autumn, September to November. And the project behind us, you can just about see, particularly the top left picture, You might not be able to see it, but you can get a sense of it here, actually. This estate was deliberately allowed by Hackney Council to run down as part of a regeneration, redevelopment project, gentrification project, depending on how you think of it, over the last 20 or so years. And the final stage of Hackney's involvement with that was the boarding up of the windows of empty flats with orange boards. This outraged the residents. Still half the flats in the block were occupied, because they were already seen, or unseen rather. They were invisible in the larger community, and obviously estates have come with all sorts of problems attached to them, often by exterior agencies as opposed to the people who live on them. And they were outraged that this invisibility was continuing with these orange boards being put over the windows of flats. And so they occupied the boards by putting photographic portraits, window-sized portraits of themselves across the boards of the estate block, up to 65 portraits, which is still there. And this very quickly became a very significant site-specific art project which attracted international attention. It's called I Am Here, and it's still there. It's still there now, and it will continue until the buildings come down in the autumn. This became not just a creative project, of course. The artists lived on the estate, they still do live on the estate, but it became an absolutely urgent sense of social reclamation of identity, if you like, of a form of erasure before even the building in which they lived had been demolished. They will all be rehoused on the site in the new block, which is a mix of private and social housing, and that was the result of many years campaigning on behalf of the residents and the housing association that had a footprint on the site. But now the project, which then took a second iteration with a book exploring the utopian nature of social housing in the 20th century, and its systematic erasing out, so that we see almost no exclusive public social housing being built, and of course a complete shift in what it means to live around an estate in the city over the last 40 or 50 years. So the book charted the change and decline of the belief in social housing, and it's moved now more to a sense of welfare housing, with all the subsequent dislocations in community that will follow from that if people do not or are not able to make lifelong roots in a place. The third project now, which is happening, is taking place now, is the film is underway, is a feature film documentary of the project called Estate, which will look both at the history of the building and the area, and of course the housing project itself, with archive footage and contemporary filming. I will also imagine a sense of how the future of the area might go. Of course, anybody who knows Hackney will know, as one of the Olympic boroughs, it's undergoing profound change now. Many of the infrastructure projects are very good, of course. It's not a simple black or white opposition to them at all. But crucial, I think, to the diversity of the borough and its success now as a borough is the very fact that, of course, people can live in it in different ways, in all sorts of different places, different spaces, and different environments. So the form of belonging that urban dwelling takes is much more high density, as we all know, much more complex in lots of ways than non-urban living. And yet, of course, if we're going to try and reduce the impact that we have ecologically, then the cities that we live in need to become much smarter, much more aware of what they do and how they live and how we live within them, much more acutely sensitive, if you like, of course, to all the ecological aspects of our lives, but also to how we identify ourselves around this shared sense of place and forms of belonging, which can allow, of course, inevitably will, allow huge amounts of diversity, but will allow this common understanding that we inhabit these streets, these districts, and this city, finally. And one of the most interesting final expressions, if you like, of the estate project, if we could go, if you like, to the Studio 75 site, the third site, is this space, which is literally just a single council flat on one of the buildings that we previously emptied and is now just behind this photograph, is slowly coming down. This is one council flat that was reclaimed as an artist studio space. It's a very, very small space. The main room, can take about 45 people, very cosily. But what's happened with this space over the last year or so is that it's also become a screening space called flat screens. And once a month, residents from the estate and visitors, writers, artists, whoever wants to come, will come to watch a film. Food is prepared in the space. The whole event, of course, is free. And then after the film, there is a discussion. But the films are not your regular releases at all. They're chosen both contemporary work and historical work, and explicitly around their addressing or their ability to address successfully issues of how to live and the forms of meaning that our lives need to take if we're going to make the changes that we need to make collectively to new ways of living more sustainably. And they've included films like Patricia Guzman's Nostalgia for the Light, an extraordinary essay film about disappearances in Chile and astronomy. Jonah, who will be 25 in the year 2000, John Berger's great film about post-68 culture in Europe, and so on. And there's one more screening in April, and then the building will be demolished. But working as a film curator, which I have been doing for about 15 years, these have been among the most exciting screenings that I've ever been involved in. It's really hard to overstate the energy and intensity of these audiences, precisely because they are mixed. And they are bringing people together who live literally above the screening space or just a minute away, and people from across the city who have heard about them and want to attend them. And because they link together all the forms of belonging that we actually take part in our daily lives, from eating together, from talking together, and then in this case, sitting together to watch a film in a public space, not atomized, of course, online or in smaller ways, within the old way of what cinema is, which is a shared bringing together of a viewing. And they have really sort of tapped into something, I think, which is partly what I would like to end on, which is the idea of how scale operates in place. Some of the previous projects I've done, I mentioned earlier, have been quite large. They've been, in one case, across the country, if only a conceptual sense of that country for us as viewers. Taking in the whole of the Yorkshire Dales, a film across the county, and so on. But this is literally in one room, a room that is about a tenth of the size of this room. And yet, in that space, at that scale, you can do all sorts of things that you can't do at a larger scale. And of course, the intimacy of these addresses being broadcast works in a very, very different, but can work in a similar way, to bring ideas very close to people, of course. But there is something which we all know, which is part of the reason why we're all here today, about meeting together to make conversations possible and to make links between people possible in a way that can never happen online or digitally. And the issue of scale and the smallest becoming perhaps the largest impact is something I think I would just like to leave you with, if I may. It's certainly massively effective how I thought about what I do, that there is not necessarily a kind of critical mass that needs to be reached in infrastructure terms before you can actually achieve what you want to achieve. And ideas can go out from the smallest base and have a huge impact. And I'd like to just end, if I could, with the great observation by the inventor, one of the photographic inventors of our time, Edwin Land, who said, "Don't attempt anything unless it's manifestly important and clearly impossible." And so if we think of Edwin Land, then I think we can apply that to all our lives, whatever we do. Thank you very much.